Hello, I'm X2Cat and welcome back to the second channel video. Today I'm here in Switzerland, or to be more precise, I'm on top of the mountain Uetliberg in Zurich, and that's Zurich behind me actually. And yeah, I want to kind of talk about Switzerland. It's a place I've wanted to go to for a very long time, finding the circumstances was kind of tricky, but I'm here now, and it's one of those places that's kind of tricky to classify. Like, in my head I was always trying to apply, this stereotype or that stereotype to the place, and kind of understand it, and because, that's something you can do of a lot of places. It's probably offensive and you probably shouldn't, but it's something you kind of can do. But the thing about Switzerland is a lot of the things that people assume are true about this place actually aren't. It's one of the world's most misunderstood places, I think, and I figured rather than saying here are some things you think about Switzerland but are perhaps wrong about, I figured why not instead talk about some things that I thought about Switzerland that are actually entirely wrong, in some cases literally the opposite, and I figured why not do that in today's video. So hopefully we'll do enjoy it, but let's get straight into the first thing, which is probably the biggest misconception, and this is one that I even mentioned in a video way back, because basically a lot of people assume that in Switzerland, like with other European countries, they speak a language named after the country. So in Switzerland's case, they speak Swiss here, right? And that's the tiniest bit true, but not really at all, because they do speak Swiss German, but Swiss German is very much a type of German. It's Swiss people and Germans have some difficulty understanding each other, but it is the same underlying language. It is the same language. It's not the whole own thing. And even then, if you think, oh well, Swiss German, Swiss, kind of the same thing, that's still not entirely true. Everyone in Switzerland speaks Swiss because Swiss German is the largest language here. But there are actually 4 official languages in Switzerland, which is a lot really. But the other 3 are French, which is spoken to the west side of the country, where the French border is, near Geneva and stuff, and to the south side of the country, bordering Italy, a lot of people speak Italian, and then there's even one canton where they also speak Romansh, a very small, in terms of population of people speaking it, language that is official co-language of the country. And after those 4 languages they speak here, the 5th language is the one of the name of the country. It's actually, it's not favour one of those 4 languages. They actually call their country in Latin, which is Confederation Helvetia, which is why it's .ch or the ch franc or something, and also everyone, because obviously it's the international language, kind of speaks English here. So there's kind of 6 languages, which is a bit messy, and none of them are Swiss at all. So yeah, the second fun thing about Switzerland, again you assume, and that is very stereotyped but is kind of wrong, is actually to do with the untimeliness. So this is actually one where it goes wrong and then wrong back the other way, because if you speak to any Swiss person about the trains, they'll tell you, this is true for a lot of European countries, they'll be like, oh no, trains have really gone downhill, they're always late and this and that. But if you actually look at the statistics, something like 13% of trains aren't running on time, which is really bad when you look at that. So okay, the Swiss timekeeping and perfection stuff, not actually right. But the funny thing is it then flips back in the other direction, because any Swiss person will tell you, oh yeah, trains gone downhill, the untimeliness, the country's being run by bears or something like that. But the truth is the untimeliness rating, which has gone down only 2% below their target, by the way. So 2% drop and everyone's going crazy. And yeah, if you actually look around at a train station as a train's late, it was literally 1 minute. So a train was arriving at 16, was meant to arrive at 16 past. It was 17 past, and I saw a third of the platform frantically checking their phones or their watches, and it was hilarious to see. But yeah, it's funny because that's actually a reverse thing, because the train's untimeliness is actually very good, because to be one of those late trains, it only has to be 3 minutes late, which again isn't actually a significant late amount of time compared to most other European countries, where they measure the untimeliness by 10 or 15, I think it is in the UK, minutes late, which means that even though the untimeliness looks about the same, again I think 87 is roughly what the UK is, when you compare 15 minutes late versus 3 minutes, it's not really the same thing, and that's why it's, again, so they think they're not on time, but they actually are really on time, and it's one of those you're double wrong. So either way, that's how that kind of works out. So the third thing about Switzerland, I guess a lot of people would assume, is that it actually is just one giant country, and oh yeah, it's all Swiss and they all speak this and that. But like I said before, not only is Switzerland, Switzerland, if you don't know, is divided into 26 cantons, which are very similar to, I guess, a US state or a state in any other country, where they're kind of in control of their own stuff. And this is a really interesting next level thing, because of the fact that also, by the way, it's actually 26 cantons, but 6 of those are half cantons. We can maybe get into that later, but it's kind of going to the US and assuming, oh yeah, well, California is exactly the same as New York, which is the same as Alaska, which is the same as Wyoming, all basically the same place, right? All the US. And although you can kind of get away with doing that for some things, I think the fact that not only are the cantons in Switzerland kind of more powerful than states and more diverse, some of them speak different languages, some of them have their entirely own sets of laws, taxes, and all this sort of stuff. And by the way, some of those fun laws, because I was looking into it, you always hear about things you can't really do in Switzerland. In certain cantons, you're not allowed to have one house cat by themselves. You have to have 2 house cats, because it's considered animal cruelty to not give them a companion. In certain cantons, you're actually not allowed to pee standing up if you're a guy after 10 p.m. I think it's something to do with noise or something like that. But still, there are lots of... and one of the cantons didn't allow women to vote until 1991. There's all these like crazy different rules about the different cantons, and it kind of just proves the point that they're all different places with different rule sets, and they also speak different languages too. So one of the things that you probably don't assume, but it's actually 26 cantons more than one giant united Switzerland. Like, it's one of the more united countries of disunited places around the world, I'd say. You know, like kind of like the United States, and maybe that's part of why it's successful, or maybe it gets in the way. Who can tell for sure? But it's one of those things you might not figure. The next thing actually is to do. I think I mentioned Texas a second ago, but I actually assumed until I was literally here and I was like, oh yeah, well it's kind of like a socialist or social democratic or whatever country, and that's probably what you assume because a lot of European countries, especially this side of Europe, kind of are that way. And you know, whether you like it or not, that's how a lot of them are. However, but when you look up the government spending as percentage of GDP in Switzerland and you compare that to, again, like pretty much any other European country, it's way below. It's even below that of the US, which is pretty nuts. And when you can, and even, you know, out of that 30% or whatever it is that's spent by the government, only 10% of that is by the federal level. The rest goes to the cantons, proving my previous point a bit more. And yeah, that's kind of a crazy little fact. They spend less, you know, even though they're seen as having these crazy good public services, it's just because the government is very efficient and hyper-organized. And again, I think it's one of those cool things that no matter which side of the spectrum you believe in, you can be like, go Switzerland, good job there. Efficient government, nice job. But yeah, with that said, while we're talking about the government, because a lot of people assume that Switzerland is actually inside the Euro area, which is, again, it's somewhat true. Like they're kind of like a half. They're not like a full member. They're like kind of half in, half out, because they are in. You know, they're not inside the Euro, but they are inside the Schengen Treaty, which means that they're inside the borderless area, inside that borderless treaty, which means you can get here again with no real checks. I mean, you technically need a passport, but there's free movement of people, all that sort of stuff. I think I could just live in Switzerland tomorrow if I wanted to. Maybe I should, but so they're kind of like half in that way, but they're not actually part of the EU. They pay to be part of the market, they pay to be part of all these things, but they're not part of the EU as a whole. So that, you know, the laws, they kind of evolve in harmony, but they're not exactly the same. And also, they don't use the euro. And one thing I really love about Switzerland, because I was trying not to use cash until this morning, where I literally need it for breakfast, is the currency. It's called the Swiss franc. I put my wallet down on the wall, let's hope it doesn't fly off. It's called the Swiss franc, and it just looks so cool. Like, I don't know, way cooler than any other currency I've seen. And yeah, it's called the Swiss franc because it was in the same way that lots of countries call their currencies the dollar or the pound after the, you know, US or UK currency. You know, it was named after the franc, and now it's the only franc left in the world, if I'm not mistaken. That's what I read at one point, and I found that very fascinating that, you know, Switzerland uses the franc because of that whole French thing. I know, one of those cool things that loops the country back around into each other, and it doesn't use the euro. Although some places, like right where I am right now, there's like a tower up there that only accepts euros for some reason, and like there's some places that will accept euros, but by and large, the Swiss franc is the larger currency. And there's lots of cool little bizarre variations of where that goes, such as the enclave of Germany. But anyway, let's talk about the next thing, which is to do actually with the kind of perceived notion that, in the same way that you probably see it as like a social democratic country, you probably assume it's very liberal, like, oh yeah, they're the future when it comes to like being humane and stuff. But actually, I think that's something, again, where you might get it confused with Sweden, Norway, and the Nordic countries and countries like that, because there's lots, although they are very good at like direct democracy, and there's lots of very strong, cool initiatives that you're like, good job, Switzerland. There's also lots of weird things where you're like, that's very different, and you might see that as bizarre. So for instance, there is mandatory military service. Even though they are a neutral country, you have to serve in the military or like a military-related position for something like 3 years, I think it is. And then when you're done serving in the military, you get to keep your gun. So something like 29% of citizens actually own a gun in Switzerland, which is you know, very, very different to any other, I guess, European country this side of like Eastern Europe, which is very, very bizarre. But as well as that, universal suffrage, so women's right to vote, countrywide, was only implemented in like 1971. And yeah, again, even though there are, you know, sorts of really cool things like, oh yeah, referendums on pretty much everything. There's something like 5 or 6 referendums a year, if not more. There's all these referendums and there's all these kind of cool democracy things, but they're not like the most forward-thinking in the world, because again, you look at those things, you're like, okay, well, it just happens that they evolve past some stuff and they evolve. Again, it's weird stuff, but it's something that's different to how you might assume it, and that blew my mind a little bit, the 1971 women voting thing. Maybe it did for you too, but yeah. What I'm trying to graze with all of these things is that I guess what people assume of Switzerland and what Switzerland are kind of just very, very different things, and that's kind of shocking to me. I mean, you hear, but the final thing actually was to do with banking. You always hear that, oh yeah, well, if you need to, you know, store some money overseas, get yourself a Swiss bank account. And although it's true that, you know, they have identity laws, and if you're curious, they actually go back to, if I'm not mistaken, World War II, because obviously the Jews needed to flee persecution, and the Swiss didn't want to give up their accounts and stuff when they died. There's lots of complex reasons why they had to implement the anonymity onto bank accounts, but they've actually been just about removing it, and you can't actually just evade taxes by moving your money to Switzerland. So if you wanted to move here because, oh, well, that's a nice mountain and like I don't want to pay taxes anyway, it doesn't really work that way. But yeah, Switzerland, very misunderstood country, but still a very lovely one, and I'm enjoying my time here. Honestly, I really do like it. I'm like, it would be pretty nice to leave Switzerland, because it is, even though, even though I said it's like one of those things, like it is a very hyper-efficient place. It is a very lovely looking place. There's just lots of nice things about it. And if you can afford to live here, because the cost of living, the cost of everything is so absurdly high, then maybe you should, because it's pretty darn nice. If you can learn, like 6 languages or whatever. But with that said, hope you all enjoyed the video, and I guess I'll see you all in another one. So.